CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre wasn't just another new rivalry. This feud truly changed WWE forever. It showed real hatred and emotion. But what was the thing that really made this rivalry special? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all began. It was Survivor Series 2023, and just when we thought the show was over after the babyface's epic win, Cult of Personality blasted through the arena. CM Punk was back in WWE for the first time in nearly a decade. The crowd lost their minds, chanting his name as he took in the moment with that classic smirk, clearly fired up. Randy Orton looked thrilled. Seth Rollins? Not so much. He looked ready to square up with Punk right there. And then there was Drew McIntyre. He didn't clap, he didn't cheer. Instead, Drew stormed out, and you could just feel the tension building. Was it anger? Was it ego? Or was it the start of something we hadn't even imagined yet? In the weeks leading up to the Royal Rumble, tensions rose, with a notable exchange taking place on the December 11th, 2023 episode of Raw. During this episode, Jey Uso hyped up the crowd and called for support for Punk, urging the fans to chant "Yeet" if they wanted CM Punk on Raw. Drew McIntyre interrupted, visibly annoyed, and told Jey to stop kissing Punk's arse. He made it clear to Adam Pearce and the audience, "We don't want him in the Raw locker room. SmackDown can have him." McIntyre then emphasized his personal history with Punk, stating that he had traveled with him for years and knew who Punk really was. These statements added to McIntyre's campaign against Punk, painting him as someone who didn't belong in the Raw locker room. McIntyre continued dropping cryptic comments in interviews and backstage segments, reinforcing that he knew the real Punk and questioning Punk's motive. After the heated exchange between Jey Uso and Drew McIntyre on the December 11th episode of Raw, McIntyre emerged from Adam Pearce's office, his expression set with determination. As he stepped into the hallway, he crossed paths with CM Punk. McIntyre paused, locked eyes with Punk, and declared, "I don't care about your story or Cody's story. I care about my story." Without another word, he walked away, leaving Punk smirking but visibly intrigued. Shortly after, Pearce revealed that McIntyre had secured a title shot against Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight Championship. Fans could sense something brewing, but the real explosion happened at the Royal Rumble. CM Punk's first televised WWE match in almost 10 years was special. Entering at number 27, he brought the energy and skill that reminded everyone why he was such a big deal. The crowd was electric, but Drew McIntyre, who entered at number 29, came in with fierce determination, ready to make his mark. When Punk and McIntyre squared off, the atmosphere was intense, and the crowd was buzzing. The match had some standout moments that highlighted just how tough both guys were. Punk eliminated Dominic Mysterio, showing he still had it. McIntyre, on the other hand, took out Sami Zayn and Ricochet, proving he was there to dominate. Their clash was filled with hard strikes and close calls, keeping everyone on the edge of their seats. The pivotal moment came when McIntyre hit Punk with a hard, future shock DDT, seemingly aggravating Punk's triceps injury. The battle continued, with both men refusing to back down. In a dramatic twist, Punk found a way to eliminate McIntyre later in the match, crushing Drew's hopes of a WrestleMania main event and adding more fuel to their growing feud. The final three came down to Cody Rhodes, CM Punk, and Gunther. Cody took out Gunther, leaving a dramatic face-off between him and Punk. After an intense back and forth, Cody managed to eliminate Punk, ending Punk's dream of headlining WrestleMania. Punk's injury forced him to step back, which meant WWE had to quickly adjust its plan. Here's the surprising twist. The rivalry between Punk and McIntyre wasn't even part of the original blueprint. In a behind-the-scenes WrestleMania 40 documentary, Triple H, the mastermind of WWE's creative direction, disclosed that the initial plan was for Punk to clash with Seth Rollins. This matchup would have been packed with genuine animosity, built on years of sharp exchanges and unresolved tension between the two. If Punk hadn't gotten injured, Drew McIntyre wouldn't have become so deeply involved with Punk as his first major rival. But as with many great wrestling stories, unexpected events reshaped the narrative. Instead of letting the injury disrupt the story, WWE leaned into it, turning real-life setbacks into captivating storytelling. McIntyre jumped on the opportunity, using Punk's injury in his promos to position himself as the rightful top contender. This move didn't just elevate McIntyre, but sparked one of the most exciting rivalries WWE had seen in years. After CM Punk got injured at the Royal Rumble, Drew McIntyre wasted no time stepping up. On the January 29th, 2024 episode of Raw, Drew cut a fiery promo saying, "I prayed for this, and it happened." He went on about his journey to the top, mentioning his WWE Championship win at WrestleMania 36, which had no live fans because of the pandemic, and his tough loss to Roman Reigns at Clash at the Castle in 2022. These setbacks, he said, made him more determined than ever to finally get his big moment in front of the fans. Then came Elimination Chamber on February 18th, 2024, where Drew's performance secured his spot spot at WrestleMania. Starting against LA Knight, he quickly took control, eliminating Bobby Lashley with 2 Claymore kicks. When AJ Styles unexpectedly showed up and took out Knight with a chair, Drew seized the moment to pin Knight. Despite Logan Paul's interference in the final moment, Drew clinched the win by pinning Randy Orton, securing his shot at the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania. During this time, Drew's promos were all about proving he deserved the spotlight. Even though Punk was out, Drew kept bringing up their rivalry, keeping the tension alive. He was clearly ready to finally take center stage. Then, on March 25th, 2024, one of the best segments ever on Raw took place. CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, and Seth Rollins went off-script, mixing reality with storyline in a way that had everyone glued to their screen. Drew, sitting confidently on the announce desk, started things off by questioning Punk's loyalty to WWE. He threw shade at Punk's past controversies and long breaks from the company, basically saying Punk's return was all about himself and not the fan. Drew's shots were personal, trying to make Punk look like he didn't truly care about WWE. He also had that shirt, which called him the savior of WrestleMania, and also mocked Punk. Punk, standing in the ring, fired back hard. He pointed out Drew's past failures and dared him to bring up Vince McMahon. This was a dig at Drew's early WWE career when Vince himself had labeled him the chosen one. The comment brought a real tension to the moment, making it clear Punk wasn't holding back. Rollins, as the reigning World Heavyweight Champion, jumped in to mock both of them. He played on their insecurities, acting like he was leagues above them and saying neither of them could handle being on his level. His jabs only added fuel to the fire as the three kept trading verbal shots. Right at the end, Drew had the last word. He referenced Eminem's song Stan, calling Punk his Drew's biggest stan in a funny but cutting way. This got a huge reaction from the crowd just before Rollins blindsided him, leaving Drew laid out and Punk heading up the ramp. Fans were buzzing over what they'd just witnessed. Reports later revealed that this promo wasn't fully scripted, letting each guy go for it and see what happened. The result was raw, real, and set the stage for their WrestleMania clash. To top it all off, it was later announced that Punk would be the guest commentator for the Rollins vs. McIntyre's match at WrestleMania 40, adding even more excitement to the showdown. However, things got even more personal at WrestleMania. At WrestleMania 40, Drew McIntyre faced Seth freaking Rollins for the World Heavyweight Championship, with CM Punk on guest commentary, adding fuel to an already intense rivalry. Rollins came into this match worn down after a grueling tag team bout the night before, where he'd teamed up with Cody Rhodes against Roman Reigns and The Rock. Rollins wasn't at 100%, giving McIntyre a real shot at his long-awaited WrestleMania moment. The match was fierce, with both men digging deep despite Rollins' exhaustion. In the end, McIntyre hit 2 devastating Claymore kicks to finally capture the World Heavyweight title, a moment that meant everything to him after years of setbacks and missed opportunities. This was supposed to be his crowning achievement, a moment he'd dreamt of since his early days in WWE, especially after missing out on having his WrestleMania 36 win celebrated live due to the pandemic. But before he could soak it all in, McIntyre couldn't resist taunting Punk, who had been throwing subtle jabs all night. McIntyre walked over to the commentary table, holding up the title and shouting, "This is what you'll never have." Punk, never one to back down, grabbed McIntyre's leg, dropped him down, and beat him up. This opened the door perfectly for Damian Priest to cash in his money in the bank contract. Just minutes after his big win, McIntyre lost the title to Priest, with Punk's interference effectively ruining the biggest moment of his career. Punk's involvement was more than just a physical hit. It was personal, striking Drew where it hurt most. Punk's commentary throughout the night, including calling Rollins' entrance goofy and his attack on Drew, only added layers of betrayal and bitterness to their story. What should have been a WrestleMania dream turned into ultimate heartbreak for McIntyre, making his rivalry with Punk even deeper and setting up a showdown that fans were now more eager to see than ever. However, it looked like Punk made it his mission to make Drew McIntyre's life a living hell. But what happened when Drew showed up on Raw the night after WrestleMania 40, still steaming from having his title stolen? On the Raw episode right after WrestleMania 40, Drew McIntyre showed up furious, clearly still bitter over his stolen WrestleMania moment. Later that night, he was set to compete in a #1 contender's fatal 4-way match against Jey Uso, Ricochet, and Bronson Reed for a shot at World Heavyweight Champion Damian Priest. But first, Drew had some things to get off his chest. What did he have to say about Priest and Punk? Drew kicked off his night by storming to the ring and cutting an intense promo. He didn't hold back, calling out Damian Priest for cashing in and stealing his title just minutes after he'd won it. He told the crowd his moment only lasted 5 minutes and 46 seconds, and even took a shot at them, saying, "That's 5 minutes longer than most of you last in bed, so shut it." Drew admitted he respected Seth Rollins, but he was now laser-focused on Priest, calling him a transitional champion. Then he turned his anger on CM Punk, calling him a prick who deliberately ruined his big moment. Drew reminded everyone how he'd warned Punk he would win the title, celebrate with his family, and rub it in his face, only for Punk to mess it all up by sweeping his leg out and smashing him with his metal brace. Drew Drew ended his rant by saying if Punk thought tearing his tricep was bad, he'd be in for a world of hurt. This was now a full-blown feud. However, Drew probably should have minded his words at that time because of what happened next. When it was time for the Fatal 4-Way, Drew brought all that fire into the ring. The match was wild, with intense back and forth between all four guys. Drew was in control, taking out Ricochet by throwing him into the barricade and setting up a table in the corner. But just as he was about to hit Jey Uso with a Claymore, CM Punk showed up and grabbed his ankle, tripping him up just long enough for Jey to strike. Jey hit Drew with a super kick, followed by a spear, and finished it off with an Uso splash. Punk was grinning and even yeeted as Jey got the pin, becoming the new #1 contender for Priest's World Heavyweight Championship. Once again, Punk had cost Drew a shot at the title, turning up the heat even more on their intense feud. But Drew wasn't done making his voice heard. On April 29, 2024, episode of Raw, he was still bitter about the fallout from WrestleMania and about Punk. When it was announced that Punk had been drafted before him, Drew was furious. Backstage with Booker T, he couldn't believe the praise being given to Punk. Drew scoffed, calling Punk a corporate ass-kisser who'd done nothing but get injured in one match. Taking it even further, Drew claimed Punk had fractured his elbow during the WrestleMania attack. Unlike Punk, who he said was just sitting at home collecting a paycheck, Drew made it clear that he'd been fighting through the injury. Then, as Drew vented to the crowd, Punk's music hit. Drew scanned the stage, but Punk was shown sitting in a luxury box instead, calling Drew a little bitch. A furious McIntyre stormed to the box, only to find a signed photo of Punk waiting for him. In the ring, Punk continued his taunts, mocking Drew's 5-minute reign and calling him an ex-girlfriend he can't get rid of. With the crowd firmly on his side, Punk ended by promising that once cleared, he'd make Drew's life a living hell. This wasn't just about titles anymore. It was getting deeply personal. Punk wasn't holding back the following week either. On the May 6th, 2024 episode of Raw, Punk took to the ring, calling out Drew McIntyre in one of his sharpest promos yet. The crowd was electric as he strolled in, soaking up chants of CM Punk. He mocked McIntyre, saying he could finish his business in less time than Drew's 5-minute title reign. With his classic wit, Punk labeled Drew a choke artist. Not the kind of choke artist Punk is, but the kind who can't hold on to success. Punk dug deeper, saying McIntyre's prayers for his injury only brought Punk back stronger and more determined. McIntyre prayed for this, he said, warning that if Drew showed his face, Punk would break his elbow, face, and even his heart. And if Drew was too afraid to confront him, Punk promised to find him, even if he had to hide in a bowl of haggis in Glasgow, which for those of you who don't know, it's a traditional Scottish dish. However, Punk's absence didn't slow Drew down one bit. While Punk was out, Drew saw his opening and fought his way back into the title picture, securing a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship at Clash at the Castle in his home country of Scotland. For Drew, this wasn't just another title match. It was a shot at redemption. 2 years earlier, he'd been robbed of his moment by interference against Roman Reigns on this same stage, devastating him in front of his home crowd. Now, with a second chance, Drew was more determined than ever to claim the victory that had slipped through his fingers. But just when it seemed like Drew was set for redemption, fate and Punk had other plans. At Clash at the Castle, Drew McIntyre squared off against Damian Priest in a brutal showdown for the World Heavyweight Championship. The crowd was electric, chanting Drew's name as he hit Priest with devastating moves, even sending him crashing through the barricade with a Claymore. For Drew, this was about more than just a title. It was redemption for his heartbreaking loss to Roman Reigns in front of his home crowd 2 years prior. Just as Drew looked ready to reclaim his moment, a ref bump brought out none other than CM Punk as the replacement official. The fans were stunned, but things took a darker turn when Punk hit Drew with a low blow, allowing Priest to deliver a final chokeslam and retain his title. The crowd sat in stunned silence as Punk walked away, once again shattering Drew's hopes and making this rivalry even more personal. But what happened on the following Raw shocked everyone. Drew McIntyre, still reeling from his loss at Clash at the Castle, came out looking absolutely furious. Fans saw clips from after the match where Drew had completely lost it, intimidating the referee and even grabbing Corey Graves by the throat. When he got to the ring, chants of CM Punk echoed, and Drew could barely even get Punk's name out. He was clearly too angry to find the words. Then, in a move that stunned the entire WWE universe, Drew simply said, "Screw this company, I quit." And just like that, he walked off, ignoring Raw GM Adam Pearce's attempts to stop him. Even the game himself, Triple H, tried talking him down backstage, but Drew was done. Honestly, it made sense. Drew had been pushed to his limit, watching his dreams slip away yet again thanks to Punk. However, we were yet to see Drew's true dark side. On the following SmackDown in Chicago, the hometown crowd exploded as CM Punk opened the show with his usual confidence, taking jabs at Drew McIntyre for quitting after Clash at the Castle. Punk didn't hold back, saying that when Drew attacked him, he wasn't just attacking Punk, he was attacking Chicago. Chicago, he promised to bury Drew's career 6 feet under, saying Drew couldn't handle the pressure. The crowd was fully behind Punk, but little did they know, Drew was already lurking. Later in the show, during a backstage interview with Grayson Waller and DIY, chaos erupted backstage. Suddenly, Drew appeared, dragging a bloodied Punk through the garage. He tossed Punk on the ramp, mocked him by taking his friendship bracelet, and left him battered. At that moment, we had no idea just how significant this bracelet would become in their rivalry. Officials tried to step in, but Drew was out for vengeance, finally unleashing the brutality he'd been holding back. As Punk was loaded into an ambulance, it was clear this feud was far from over, and Drew was willing to cross any line to get back at Punk. Drew didn't just leave things at that brutal attack on SmackDown. On Raw, he strutted in through the crowd, ignoring the loud CM Punk chants, and went straight for the heart of the matter. Last week, everyone thought he quit, but now they were talking about something else: what he did to Punk in Chicago. With a smirk, Drew replayed the clip of his ruthless attack, looking more than satisfied with himself. In his promo, Drew took things to a new low. He revealed he'd taken Punk's beloved friendship bracelet, flaunting it as a trophy. With Punk's wife AJ and his dog Larry on that bracelet, Drew knew exactly how personal this was. Punk's all alone, miserable, and in pain now, he sneered, saying that would be a theme moving forward. Then, he made his next move clear, entering Money in the Bank to secure the contract, with plans to cash in that very night and finally become world champion. When Raw GM Adam Pearce told him he'd need to qualify first, Drew warned that if Pearce didn't do the right thing, he'd learn what real disruption looked like. But Drew's journey to Money in the Bank was just getting started. Drew McIntyre secured his spot in the Money in the Bank ladder match by defeating Sheamus and Ilya Dragunov. With that win, Drew was more determined than ever to finally secure his path back to the world title. The Money in the Bank ladder match was wild from the start, with stars like Jey Uso, LA Knight, Carmelo Hayes, Chad Gable, and Andrade all going for the coveted briefcase. Drew fought like a man possessed, taking down anyone in his path with brutal moves. Finally, after a grueling battle and a Claymore kick that took out Uso, Drew climbed the ladder and grabbed the briefcase, securing his ticket to a future title shot. Later that night, Drew tried to pull a Dean Ambrose by cashing in on the same night he won the Money in the Bank. He aimed to swoop in during Damian Priest's title defense against Seth Rollins. But just when it seemed like Drew might finally get his big moment, CM Punk showed up and ruined everything. Punk unleashed his fury, hitting Drew with a steel chair and even the championship belt. The crowd went wild, watching Punk take his revenge. Damian Priest capitalized on the chaos, retaining his title while Punk stood tall on the commentary table, staring down Drew and Rollins, both of whom had serious issues with Punk's presence. Drew's dream was shattered once again, thanks to Punk, and it was clear this rivalry was far from over. However, Drew wasn't about to let Punk off the hook that easily. After Money in the Bank, Drew stormed the post-show set, calling Punk out and causing absolute chaos. He was furious and demanded Punk face him then and there. WWE officials rushed in to calm things down, but Drew wasn't having any of it. He started swinging, even going after Raw GM Adam Pearce, who tried to intervene. Things got tense when Wade Barrett, one of Drew's close friends on commentary duty for the night, jumped in and warned Drew that his career would be on the line if he didn't cool off. Drew finally let himself be escorted away, but you could see it in his eyes. He was ready to go through anyone to get his revenge on Punk. This rivalry had officially gone nuclear, but just when fans thought things couldn't get more intense, the fallout hit hard. On the following Raw, both CM Punk and Drew McIntyre faced fines for their actions at Money in the Bank. In Drew's case, it wasn't just a fine, but a suspension, all because he went after Raw GM Adam Pearce during the post-show. With McIntyre out of the picture, Punk took the chance to rub it in. Opening the show, Punk addressed his brutal takedown of McIntyre, smirking as he called Drew the $1 million body with a 10-cent brain and the Scottish keyboard warrior. He didn't hold back, making it clear that he was thrilled with how he derailed McIntyre's title dreams again. As Punk paced around, he mocked Drew's absence, saying Drew couldn't handle the consequences of messing with him. Punk then made a bold request to Pearce: lift Drew's suspension so they could settle things once and for all. Just when it seemed Punk was done, Seth Rollins interrupted and the tension skyrocketed. With Rollins furious at Punk's interference in the title match, he warned Punk to stay out of his way, or else. This wasn't just Punk versus McIntyre anymore. Now, Rollins had serious issues with the best in the world. But Drew McIntyre returned on Raw the following week. He was laser focused on one thing: getting his hands on CM Punk. Raw GM Adam Pearce tried to set up a showdown between the two for SummerSlam. But there was a catch. Drew had to apologize to the referees he'd attacked at Money in the Bank. Drew wasn't having. He shot down the apology, refusing to back down and blaming Pierce for siding with Punk in every conflict they'd had. Drew went on to rant about how he'd been screwed by Punk repeatedly since WrestleMania, feeling like everyone was out to keep him down. When Pierce tried to suspend him again, Drew snapped, shoving the referees aside and glaring at Pierce, making it clear he was done playing by the rules. Just as the tension peaked, Seth Rollins' music hit, and the two brawled until security had to step in. Drew stormed off, leaving fans wondering just how far he'd go to get what he wanted. But just when things couldn't get any more intense, Punk made a bold return on the next week's Raw. Fired up and officially cleared to compete, he stormed to the ring, ready to settle the score with Drew McIntyre. Punk called out Drew, wrapping his hands in tape, daring him to come down for the fight he promised. But Drew had other plans. He took his time, taunting Punk from the stage and reminding him of the fan bracelet he'd stolen, one that symbolized Punk's family. Drew knew just how to push Punk's button, but he wasn't about to give away a match for free in Green Bay. According to Drew, this was a big money match, worthy of SummerSlam. Raw GM Adam Pearce stepped in to make things official. Punk and Drew would face off at SummerSlam, but with a strict rule. If either of them threw the first punch, the match was off. And then, out of nowhere, Seth Rollins appeared, dressed in one of his signature wild outfits, with a twist that stunned everyone. He was going to be the special guest referee. Rollins, known for stirring the pot, made it clear he'd be right in the middle of their chaos at SummerSlam, ready to keep both men in line. Drew was furious about not knowing of Rollins' referee role, but the stage was set. With Rollins as referee, the match at SummerSlam was bound to be explosive. With SummerSlam around the corner, tensions exploded on Raw as special guest referee Seth Rollins laid down the law for CM Punk and Drew McIntyre. The rule? No touching each other, or the match was off. And if they laid a finger on Rollins, they'd be out too. Punk couldn't resist a jab, calling Rollins a boot-licking office boy. McIntyre fired back, calling Punk a cancer to WWE. Rollins warned them he'd be calling the shots, hinting he'd bend the rules if they crossed him. McIntyre, boiling with anger, promised to blacken Punk's eyes and break his jaw, saying he'd destroy him for free if he had to. Punk, undeterred, mocked Drew as the third wheel of their feud, accusing him of letting rage ruin his own chances. The face-off ended with McIntyre flashing Punk's beloved bracelet, taunting him in a way that left Punk seething. With SummerSlam finally here, the tension between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre was electric. In the kickoff promo, Punk started things off, calling out McIntyre for playing the victim after taking cheap shots. He vowed Drew would be on his knees praying when they clashed. Drew fired back, questioning Punk's relevance and claiming he'd been carrying WWE while Punk sat on his R's. It was the perfect setup. In the match, with Rollins as the special guest referee, chaos reigned. Punk took control early, tossing Drew into the barricade and steel steps, but Drew fought back just as fiercely. Rollins let Drew get away with using a chair, fueling the tension. The turning point came when Drew mocked Punk by wearing his treasured bracelet. Punk, furious, fought back, and near falls kept the crowd on edge. In frustration, Punk hit Rollins with the GTS after Rollins delayed his counts. Drew took advantage, low-blowing Punk and sealing his victory with a claymore. Drew stood smugly victorious, but the rivalry was far from over. Hell in a Cell loomed, promising an even fiercer battle. The fallout from SummerSlam had barely settled, and Punk was already back, fired up on Raw. He acknowledged his loss to McIntyre, but he made it clear this was only the beginning. The crowd was electric as he demanded a rematch, vowing he wouldn't quit until he proved he was still the best. Just then, Rollins showed up, ready to go after Punk himself. But before anything could happen, McIntyre interrupted from the stands, holding up Punk's treasured bracelet and taunting him as the new best in the world. Punk charged through the crowd to get to him, but Drew slipped away, leaving Punk furious. Meanwhile, Rollins was blindsided by Bronson Reed, who delivered 6 brutal tsunami splashes, leaving Rollins coughing up blood. Backstage, an enraged Punk stormed around, searching for McIntyre, only to hear he'd already left. This rivalry had reached a new level, with Punk and Drew ready to go to any lengths to settle the score. With last week's showdown still fresh, this Raw cranked up the tension even higher in the Punk-McIntyre saga. Drew McIntyre stormed into Adam Pearce's office, unfazed by news that Punk supposedly wasn't in the building due to travel issues. Drew shrugged it off, saying he had bigger things to worry about, namely Randy Orton, a SmackDown star, getting a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. Drew promised Pearce he'd be on his best behavior, a claim that felt laughably short-lived. Later, during Orton and Gunther's heated exchange in the ring, McIntyre couldn't resist making his presence known, interrupting the segment and heightening the tension. But the real surprise came when Punk jumped the barricade, charging straight at Drew. The two immediately clashed at ringside, with Punk ripping Drew's belt from him and landing some well-deserved lashes. Drew quickly retreated, leaving the crowd buzzing. Backstage, Punk revealed that travel issues were just a trick to catch Drew off guard. With a smirk, he hinted that he had a bigger plan in the works, setting the stage for an explosive showdown ahead. With their rivalry boiling boiling over, CM Punk took to the ring on next week's Raw, carrying a massive leather strap on his shoulders and looking ready to make a statement. He fired up the crowd, connecting with fans and sharing stories from his recent travels, but soon, the focus shifted to his opponent. Punk zeroed in on Drew McIntyre, calling out the biggest hater who couldn't let go of the personal grudge and the bracelet with his wife's name that Drew still wore. For Punk, this wasn't just another match. He was determined to settle things once and for all. Punk then made a bold proposal for their next encounter, a strap match at Bash in Berlin. Bound together by a strap, the only way to win this brutal match is by dragging your opponent to touch all four corners of the ring in succession. No pinfalls, no submissions, just pure willpower to overpower and drag the other to victory. Punk promised to leave Drew with lasting scars as a reminder of who he was dealing with. Just then, Drew's music hit, and he emerged with his trademark cockiness, taunting Punk for challenging him to such a brutal match. He dangled the bracelet in the air, refusing to return it, and chillingly remarked that Punk's loved ones were safer with him. The tension was undeniable, and the stage was set for a confrontation that neither would walk away from unscathed. With Bash in Berlin just days away, Drew McIntyre opened the Go Home Raw with his usual smugness. Taking the mic, he targeted Punk, mocking his speeches about the hot state of the industry, and claiming Punk spent years sitting back while others carried WWE. Drew got serious, accusing Punk of being truly scared, only attacking from behind. Holding up the bracelet as a painful reminder of what he'd taken, Drew blamed the fans for enabling Punk rather than supporting the warrior who had stood by them through it all. At that moment, Punk's music hit, and he charged the ring, immediately striking Drew with the strap. The two brawled fiercely, with Punk gaining the upper hand, whipping Drew repeatedly until security intervened, forcing Drew to retreat. This was set to be an all-out war. Berlin was going to settle who could take the most and still come out standing. With Bash in Berlin finally here, CM Punk and Drew McIntyre went head-to-head in a strap match that had fans buzzing. From the start, the tension was sky-high. Punk barely had a moment to pose before McIntyre blindsided him, dragging him through a vicious brawl that spilled outside the ring and saw Punk thrown across the commentary table. By the time they were both strapped in, it was clear this match wasn't just about winning, it was about breaking each other down. McIntyre took control early, using the strap like a weapon, but Punk fought back with his classic moves, even slamming Drew onto a steel chair. The brutal hits only seemed to drive McIntyre further, as he tore into Punk's cut and kept him grounded. Just when it looked like Drew might pull off the win, Punk delivered a perfectly timed GTS, snapping McIntyre's momentum. The match swung back and forth as both men desperately fought to reach each turnbuckle. In a poetic final moment, Punk hit Drew with one last GTS, reclaimed his stolen bracelet from Drew's wrist, and touched the last corner to win. It was Punk's first televised victory in over a decade, a redemptive moment that left fans roaring. Celebrating ringside, Punk finally triumphed in this brutal clash, conquering his fiercest rival. The Raw after Bash in Berlin promised fireworks, but no one expected the storm that was about to hit. Fresh off his victory over Drew McIntyre, CM Punk stepped into the ring to cheers, announcing his focus on the World Heavyweight Champion Gunther. It seemed Punk was finally moving past Drew, or so he thought. McIntyre, however, had other plans. Just as Punk celebrated ringside, Drew blindsided him, smashing Punk's head on the commentary table and dragging him into the ring for two brutal Claymore kicks, vowing it was never over. In a final insult, Drew ripped the bracelet from Punk's wrist, tore it apart, and shoved the beads into Punk's mouth before landing another crushing Claymore. As Punk was stretchered out, Drew attacked again near the ambulance, tearing off Punk's neck brace and digging his thumbs into Punk's eyes. As the show cut to black, the question hung heavy. Could this be the end of CM Punk? The Raw following last week's brutal events saw Drew McIntyre enter to a chorus of boos, fully embracing the CM Punk chant and taunting the crowd by calling it a tribute to Punk. Drew insisted that, despite the strap match result, things weren't over until he decided. He claimed his attack had ended Punk's career, stating he was ready to focus on the world title and his upcoming movie. But before moving forward, Drew turned his attention to Wade Barrett, warning him against getting involved again. Raw GM Adam Pearce interrupted, urging Drew to end his vendetta. Pearce then announced he'd spoken to Punk, who was far from finished. To the crowd's excitement, Pearce revealed their final clash was set for Bad Blood, inside Hell in a Cell. With Hell in a Cell looming, CM Punk returned to Raw, walking to the ring to a thunderous CM Punk chant. Punk looked ready to settle the score, admitting he'd thought their rivalry might have ended in Berlin, but now realized that Hell in a Cell was the only way to finish it. Punk addressed the personal nature of the feud, calling out Drew for dragging his loved ones into it. He reminded Drew that he'd warned of becoming the devil himself if pushed too far, and now that moment had come. Punk declared he was prepared to risk everything, to bleed, and even for his heart to stop if that's what it took to finish this. this. With a final statement, Punk questioned if Drew was willing to go to the same lengths. He left the ring with a chilling promise. They would settle it in hell, no matter the cost. With Hell in a Cell drawing closer, Raw opened with Drew McIntyre stepping into the ring, intense and focused. Addressing Punk's words from last week, Drew acknowledged that, for once, Punk seemed genuinely ready to risk it all for their final showdown. Despite the crowd's CM Punk chants, Drew kept his composure, revealing he had his own truths to share. Drew admitted that he didn't want to re-enter Hell in a Cell, a place that left him with lasting wounds, but he knew there was no turning back now. Like Punk's family, Drew's loved ones had urged him to step away, recognizing the toll it was taking. Yet, Drew remained resolute. McIntyre vowed that at Bad Blood, he would make Punk bleed and suffer, facing a level of pain he'd never known. In Drew's eyes, this was good versus evil, and he was determined to end Punk once and for all. With Bad Blood just around the corner, Raw's final face-off between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre felt like the calm before a storm. GM Adam Pearce stood in the ring, surrounded by security and the Hell in a Cell structure, giving both men one last shot to say their piece. Punk entered first, focused as he took in the cell where it would all go down. Then came McIntyre, dressed in black with a smug look. He mocked Punk, saying his outfit was no sign of respect, just a hint of Punk's fate. Drew swore that after Saturday, Punk would be broken and done for good. Punk, fueled with anger, admitted Drew had dragged him to a dark place. He'd been staying away from home, not wanting his wife to see the rage McIntyre had brought out in him. But if Drew wanted a fight with a monster, that's exactly who he'd get. Punk promised that in Hell in a Cell, he'd break Drew, leaving him begging, not to God or the devil, but to CM Punk himself. With a final, chilling line, "I'll see you in hell," Punk left Drew staring him down, knowing that on Saturday, they'd be locked in with nowhere to run. With Bad Blood finally here, CM Punk and Drew McIntyre entered Hell in a Cell to end their brutal feud once and for all. The crowd was electric as the cell lowered, and both men made their entrances, each ready for war. As soon as the bell rang, they clashed in a brawl that quickly spilled outside, with Punk slamming Drew into the unforgiving cell walls and even pulling out a table to the crowd's delight. But Drew took control, landing vicious hits, using a wrench, and dragging Punk's face into the steel steps. The intensity only escalated. Both men bled heavily, trading brutal shots with anything they could grab, from steel chairs to the wrench Drew dug into Punk's wounds. Drew even taunted Punk by dumping beads onto him from the bracelet he had taken, only to get slammed into the steel steps when Punk dodged a claymore. The match's final moments were chaotic and unrelenting. Punk wrapped his knee with a steel chain, scooped up a handful of beads, and shoved them into Drew's mouth before hitting a devastating GTS, finally pinning him for the win. Punk barely made it up the ramp, asking for his wife, but walked away victorious, having put everything on the line. Fans and critics alike praised the match as a rare spectacle of sheer brutality, calling it a perfect end to a grueling feud that set a new bar for intensity in WWE. This was wrestling at its rawest, with both men delivering on months of build-up in a way that left fans in awe. After the chaos of Bad Blood, CM Punk returned to Raw, but the damage was evident. Limping to the stage with his arm taped and his forehead bandaged, Punk stood before the crowd in St. Louis to a roaring CM Punk chant. With a tired smile, he admitted he'd been through hell, and even though he'd walked out victorious, it barely felt like a win. Punk thanked the fans who stood by him, especially the die-hard supporters who'd waited years for his return. He gave a shout-out to his peers, both on and off screen, and finally, to those who doubted him, who fueled him with their hate. This was Punk's way of making it clear that he was proud of what he'd achieved, even if it had come at a massive cost. Just as Punk wrapped up, Seth Rollins' music hit, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Rollins marched out, going face-to-face with Punk before heading to the ring. With a smirk, Rollins wished Punk a speedy recovery, adding that he couldn't wait for Punk to be back, just so he could retire him for good. It was a chilling reminder that while Punk's war with McIntyre might be over, new battles were already on the horizon. Looking back, the Punk versus McIntyre feud was something special. It wasn't just about titles or fame, it was raw, gritty, and deeply personal. This feud hit on every level. Intense promos, brutal matches, and moments that pushed both men to the edge. Punk came back to WWE with something to prove, and Drew, stepping up as his fiercest rival, forced him to dig deeper than ever before. The strap match, Hell in a Cell, they were battles that left both men changed, and for fans, they were a reminder of WWE's ability to tap into real, compelling stories. This rivalry wasn't perfect. Some parts stretched on, others might have felt repetitive, but the payoff was worth every second. It wasn't just a feud for the ages. It redefined what WWE could be, especially in an era where fans are hungry for authentic, high-stakes wrestling. Punk and McIntyre brought out the best and worst in each other, and their journey will be remembered as a turning point, setting a new bar for storytelling in WWE. Now, as we look to the future of WWE, it's hard not to think about other legendary rivalries that left an impact. Speaking of legends and brutal battles, if you think this one was intense, you should watch the video on the screen for the epic The Rivalry between Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar.